and welcome back to the Build Propulsion Lab here at Community Over Code in Denver. I'm Brian Zemers, your host, and with me is David Handermann. David, welcome to the show, and today we're going to talk about maybe deleting some code and technical debt.
Sounds great.
I'm excited. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, David Handermann, member of the Apache NiFi project, a PMC member for the last 3 years, and seen a lot over those years. Also a software engineer, one of the founding engineers at Databolo, software development firm building on Apache NiFi, and also maintain a software development blog at exceptionfactory.com. So lots of fun focus around code quality, code improvement, and deleting code that we don't need anymore.
All right, Exception Factory.
That's
I
right.
love that name. That's great. Exception Factory.
GitHub.com.
I feel like I'm an Exception Factory, but you've coined the name.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right, so you came to me and you said you love to delete code.
That's right.
I also love to delete code, so I figured we absolutely have to talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
So for those not aware, why is it important to delete code?
Yeah, well, technical debt is a common term, but to take it to a mortgage example, right? You want to get a mortgage that has the lowest amount of interest, so you can amortize that over time, pay a little. So on the technical debt side, sometimes you need to defer spending time, spending effort, and then you eventually need to go back and fix it. So cleaning out old code, things that aren't used, finding ways to improve what you've already done, makes it easier to maintain, often speed improvements, and just makes developers happier.
Yes. I think it's one of those things nobody wants to do. Everyone's afraid,
Yes.
like, oh, I might need that code, or somebody wrote it for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be there. So how do you prove that that code can be deleted?
Yeah, though that's a very good question because, especially if it's been, I've deleted code that's been on the project for 10 years in some cases as we've prepared for NiFi 2.0. So a lot of that is good testing, whether good unit testing, integration testing, system testing, and there's no substitute for actually trying it yourself. And even as much as you try that, sometimes you'll break things, but that's part of the process. But good testing is the foundation, I think, to maintaining and being able to safely and confidently delete old code.
I think you could probably say that about anything. Good foundation is probably the foundation of good software, right?
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. I know I've had this conversation a couple weeks ago about somebody, they had code and they had tests for that code, but they weren't sure if that code is being used anywhere else. So just having tests really wasn't the answer for them. But
That's
you
true.
said, you have to try it. You have to see if you actually need that code. Maybe do some tracing through your code to see if anything but tests call it.
That's true.
Yeah.
Profiling, code coverage, that only goes so far. It's easy to get hung up on numbers. And, I think the hardest thing is changing interfaces, right? You may have your interface, you may have an implementation, but if it's a public project, public API especially, that's probably the hardest thing to delete. So focusing on implementation, private protected methods, using language constructs to your advantage helps a lot too.
That's great. Yeah, that's great advice. So, so you said you recently deleted a bunch of code. Any idea how many lines?
It's got to be close to 100,000 of code and documentation. But
okay.
Unfortunately, a feature of GitHub, if you're not aware, is after you have over 10,000 commits on a project, they stop tracking lines changed. Very sad.
I didn't know that. I did not know that. Yeah.
Apache NiFi recently reached over 10,000 commits. And now you only see the commits, you don't see the lines. So you can still run the git commands, you can still get those lines added, removed, but yeah.
So you think you deleted 100,000 lines of code?
Close to it.
That's the size of a lot of Apache projects.
Yeah.
If not more than. That's impressive. So how big is NiFi?
It's got to be over 500,000 lines of code and documentation.
Yep. That's a serious size project.
Yeah, 700 plus Maven modules. It's a lot.
Wow. So, so going back to technical debt, it's not just about deleting code. Right. I would love to just keep talking about that. But what other types of things were you looking at when you're trying to manage your technical debt?
Yeah. So, a lot of things and ways to improve is not just pure deletion, but removal and replace with a more optimized solution. So one of the things Apache NiFi 2 is focused on is baselining on Java 21. So there's a lot of language features, things that are included in the JDK itself in 21 that weren't there in Java 8, 11, or 17. So moving to later versions, making use of those new language constructs allows a lot of optimization, similar to libraries. As new libraries come out with new versions, Apache Commons, Spring, making use of those new language features is then able to remove a lot of that custom code and rely on other libraries that have been bullet tested.
What was your baseline before moving to 21?
It was Java 8. So
Okay.
we had, we supported Java 8, 11, and 17, and we had regular builds on all those. But with, a lot of, again, the technical debt removal, a lot of the things we've had to change relate to libraries that are end of life, things like Jetty 9, Spring 5, and others, the Jakarta EE APIs.
Yep.
That was all part of the upgrade and a lot of removal there.
Great. So I'm actually really happy to hear that you've moving to 21. I think, especially as a library developer, I think trying to figure out what the correct version of Java you should move to is hard, right? Because
Yes.
you don't want to alienate your users, but at the same time, it's not free just to maintain all of those old versions. At bare minimum, say you're running the same code, you still have to run twice the amount of CI, right? Because you want to test with
Did you
8
break
and then 21 or whatever.
Absolutely.
So how did you go about deciding on 21? Or you're like, I just want to use the 21 features?
That was a combination of really forcing functions from libraries, exactly as you said. So Spring 6 required Java 17 as a minimum, so we thought about starting there. I think Jetty 10 and higher required Java 11 as a minimum. So we looked at that, but then also with really last year with Java 21 reaching GA, decided, okay, we're going to need some milestone releases. Let's baseline on 21 going forward. It's also somewhat different with Apache 9.5 being an application, not just a library. So those are some of the trade-offs as well.
That's fair. Yeah. So I didn't realize. So it's an application. So that means you could be a little more
forceful.
More sort of tip. Yeah. That's good. But I also think it's healthy for other projects to move forward. I don't think it's. I don't think it's in our best interest as open source projects to allow all of these other projects to linger on older versions just because they don't feel like updating. Well, that puts the onus again on the open source developers.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing on that. Although Java 8 continues to get security updates, then that becomes an end user concern when you have. The real question is, well, which update version of Java 8 are you using? The 200 series versus 300, now into the 400 series. Things like deprecated versions of TLS, one of my favorite issues to deal with. If you're not on the latest version, you could still have security vulnerabilities. So there's also security ramifications to staying on older versions.
Absolutely. All right, David. Well, I appreciate you taking your time to hang out with us and talking about our technical debt here. We'll be here for the rest of the week. So join us again live on the Build Propulsion Lab.